Hello everyone, this is a very different concept of Lex Alexis. This is not Lex Alexis talking, it's the Storyteller. Today, the Storyteller is going to start a brand new series on this platform called Football Fairytales. And we are going to go through chapter 1 today, which is the story Barnsley Football Club. What happens next in the fairy tale is entirely in your destiny. Tell me, what club do you want to be covered in chapter 2 of Football Fairy Tales in your review for this chapter, or in the comments down below for you modern lot. We are a lovely small community, and I've left the door ajar to become a big and loving community ourselves. This is the introduction done. Let's begin chapter 1 of Football Fairy Tales, the story of Barnsley Football Club. Once upon a time, a long time ago, 133 years to be exact, we meet our first character of Barnsley Football Club by the name of Reverend Tiverton Preedy. He was a clergyman in 1887. He joined from London, from Islington, and he had a passion for sport. One of his works was creating a football club at the time, which was called Barnsley St. Peter's. And St. Peter's was the church that Reverend Tiverton Preedy preached in. At the time, Oakwell, their home, was a rugby-based area. Within a year, the club became operational. They competed in the Sheffield District League from 1890, then in the Midland League from 1895. 10 years later, in 1897, the club was renamed Barnsley Football Club, like you know them today. As Reverend Preedy had since departed, this meant that the fanbase now managed to get a wider area for the club, and it can grow. Next season, they were runners-up in the Midlands League. Along with that, they played in the Yorkshire League. Following this success, the football club decided that they wanted to apply for the Football League in 1898. They were eventually voted in and elected, and they got into the final spot available. Just imagine that they could not get into that final spot. Barnsley Football Club may not have existed. Their first game in the Football League was sadly a defeat against Lincoln City on the 1st of September 1898. 102 years before this voice came in existence. Their first win in the Football League was a 2-0 victory against Luton. John McCartney made history, scoring Barnsley's first ever league goal from the penalty spot. However, the team struggled for over 10 years in Division 2 because they had financial difficulties. However, they withered through the storm. Then came the 1909-10 season. This was the first glimpse of Barnsley at their best. They had an unbelievable FA Cup round. They beat Blackpool, Bristol Rovers, West Brom and Everton, making it to the final. They played Newcastle United in this final. They drew 1-1, was held to a replay. Unfortunately, Barnsley lost that replay by 2-0. Following that season, they were in turmoil, finishing 19th place in the league, and they were forced to reapply for the re-election to the Football League. If they weren't re-elected, Barnsley would have dropped out of the Football League entirely. However, they managed to get enough votes, and their Football League status have been restored, fortunately. 2 years after their FA Cup heartbreak, Barnsley wanted to have another go to win the FA Cup. They beat Birmingham, Leicester Foss and Bolton. Then they had to face the cup holders Bradford City, a Yorkshire-based derby. They managed to beat the cup holders and they beat Swindon in the semis. Who did they play against in the final? It was West Bromwich Albion. The first match in that final remained goalless, going to a replay. We thought, is this going to be a repeat of last time where a replay managed to lose it for Barnsley? Harry Tufnell being the hero, scoring a last gasp goal that won the FA Cup for Barnsley, which saw them parade round Yorkshire and Sheffield for days. Reverend Preedy even received the match ball and was able to have it until he died. After winning the FA Cup, they had 2 seasons where they finished in 4th and 5th, narrowly missing out on promotion. Then World War I break out, and just like football now, it's suspended. After the First World War, there were many changes that the league introduced. One of them making the first division increase to 22 teams. That opened the door for Barnsley to go up. That meant Barnsley should be automatically promoted. However, a ballot was used instead. And instead, Arsenal took their place. So heartbreak for Barnsley, jubilation for Arsenal, even though the chairman of Arsenal at the time later admitted to have some underhand dealings. In some corrupt circumstances, Barnsley remained in Division 2. A couple of seasons later, 1921 to 1922, Barnsley missed out on promotion by pretty much the closest on margins you can get, by 1 goal. Stoke City were the eventual winners in that race for promotion. It still goes for the closest of any team would come to securing promotion to the top flight without actually managing it. This heartbreak took its toll on Barnsley. They languished in the 2nd Division throughout the decade, through the 20s. In the 30s, that was when a yo-yo trend was born. They slid between the 2nd and the 3rd Division time and time after again. Eventually, World War II broke out in 1939. After the war ended, the same trend continued, yo-yoing between Division 2 and Division 3. We make it to the 60s now, and that is when Barnsley were at their lowest. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Barnsley were a shadow of the team they were. They hovered around the 3rd and even the 4th Division. They were unable to break into the top 2 flights of English football for over 20 years. However, in the late 70s, Barnsley started to revitalise. They secured back-to-back promotions up to Division 2. The player manager who was responsible for this turnaround of form was Alan Clark, obviously a very successful Leeds United player at the time. That Barnsley team consisted of well-known managerial figures such as Neil Warnock and Mick McCarthy. Another big influencer who used to play for Leeds in that Barnsley squad was Norman Hunter. And I bet that name rings a bell because sadly on Sunday it would have been a month that has passed since he's died. My thoughts go out to him and his family. The 80s and the 90s saw the club continue their revitalisation, becoming a very strong Division 2 side, striving to become a Division 1 team. We have to go to 1996-1997, which I think is probably going to be the most memorable 2 years of Barnsley fans' recent history. This was the season where they gained promotion to the Promised Land, the Premier League. They had a manager in Danny Wilson. In that 1996-1997 season in Division 1, Bolton Wanderers looked like that they were going to win the league, but it was a mission to see who would get the final automatic promotion place. It looked like to be a 2-horse race between Barnsley and Wolverhampton Wanderers. Barnsley can secure their promotion if they were to win their final home game of the season, which was a Yorkshire derby against Bradford City. They won by 1-0, and as the whistle blew, there was a sea of fans that swarmed around Oakwell, knowing that this team had managed to reach the Promised Land, the Premier League. 1997-1998, that was when Barnsley had their stint in the Premier League. And it's a pretty dramatic one to say the least. Neil Redfern, their captain, I think was their best player when they were in the Premier League. He scored some very key goals for Barnsley at some very, very key games. Their first victory came at an away game against Crystal Palace at Sellers Park. Well, Neil Redfern, as I said, he scored important goals. He scored the winner of that game, securing a 1-0 away victory. Danny Wilson's side secured weaknesses in defence. They had a 6-0, 5-0 and 7-0 defeat against Chelsea, Arsenal and Manchester United respectively. Despite this, fans were loving every moment in the Premier League. Reminds me a bit of Huddersfield Town when they were promoted up in 2017-18. A chant that was sung by Barnsley fans against my team Chelsea. They said, "We're going to win 7-6 when they were 6-0 down." That was chants back in 1997. A big positive in their season was beating Manchester United in an FA Cup game. And another really key game was beating Liverpool at Anfield. However, they had to face Liverpool again at Oakwell in one of the final games of the season, and that season would go on to define how Barnsley lost their way. The score was 1-1. Referee Gary Willard sent off 2 Barnsley players in succession. Barnsley were down to 9 men against Liverpool, the Merseyside club, to be 2-1 up at half-time. Apparently, Willard left the pitch without informing anyone. We didn't even know why he left the pitch in the first place, but when he came back, Barnsley had a bit of life in them. They managed to get an equaliser despite being down to 9 men. However, in the last minute of the game, Willard sent off another Barnsley player for a tactical foul. Liverpool scored the resulting free kick and beat Barnsley by 3-2. Following that heartbreak, they had poor results, and when they lost to Leicester City, they were relegated. To make matters worse, Danny Wilson, their most successful manager, left to join Yorkshire rivals Sheffield Wednesday. For a solid 3 years from 1998 to 2001, the period where I entered the world, Barnsley were really trying to get back into the Premier League. In the 1999-2000 season, they were very close to be promoted. However, results against them on the final day meant that Barnsley finished in 4th place. They had to try and get promoted to the Premier League via the playoffs. First opponent was Birmingham City. They managed to beat Birmingham over 2 legs and made it to the final. Their opponent in the final was Ipswich Town. One of them would be in the Premier League next season. This was the first time that Barnsley ever went to Wembley, so it was a very special moment for the club. Barnsley took the lead through Craig Hignett. However, Ipswich equalised swiftly. Shortly before half-time, Barnsley had the chance to go ahead with a penalty. However, Richard Wright, the Ipswich Town goalkeeper, saved that penalty and also saved another penalty later in the game. He saved 2 penalties. This really got to Barnsley, and Ipswich eventually ran out as 4-1 victors. Barnsley therefore had to stay in Division 1, whilst Ipswich had their chance to shine in the Premier League. 2 seasons later, things get pear-shaped. Their start to their season was a poor one, losing to 4-0 against their Yorkshire rivals Bradford City, and this was the tone for the rest of the season, not picking up a single victory away from home until they managed to beat bottom of the table Stockport County. Barnsley at that time were finishing in 11th, so they had a pretty good home record. However, after September-October, results deteriorated big time and were in the relegation zone. Barnsley needed a victory against Norwich City to avoid relegation. However, they lost 2-0, and it was the first time in over 20 years Barnsley were outside the top 2 divisions. This relegation cued more fear to the club. It's the dreaded A word, administration. This relegation and the collapse of ITV Digital left, being put the club in administration on October the 3rd, 2002 by John Dennis. 10 days before the club was due to close, an announcement was made by Administrator Matthew Dunham. The Mayor of Barnsley, Peter Doyle, was in line to complete a takeover. This was later confirmed on the 3rd of December, and fans were very unhappy with the decision to appoint Doyle. This staged a real dark time for fans, as they staged walkouts during games, protests, and even tempted to follow the steps of former Wimbledon fans by creating a breakaway club which would be known as AFC Barnsley. However, they folded towards the end of the 2005-06 season due to the salvation of the main club. From 2002 and 2005, Barnsley was stuck in the 3rd tier. Their troubles of fighting administration reflected their poor performances on the pitch. In 2005 and 2006 though, was the season where the Reds showed their old characteristic self. Andy Ritchie was named temporary manager and Paul Hart was sacked. He ended the season very well with Barnsley last season, where they finished 13th. Their strong form continued in the 2005 and 6 season, and Barnsley finished 5th in the 3rd tier. Barnsley were promoted back to the 2nd tier to the Championship in 2006. Since 2006, Barnsley have been trying to keep a very steady and secure Championship status. Barnsley at one season had some FA Cup success. They faced Chelsea at Oakwell and managed to beat them in the FA Cup. They managed to beat Liverpool at Anfield and pulled off a 2-1 victory. They made it to the semi-final of that FA Cup, and they had to beat Cardiff City to try and make the final. What was even more astonishing, West Brom. Who did they play against in the final? It was West Bromwich Albion, who of course they had to beat to win their first FA Cup. Were also in the semi-final, who had to beat Portsmouth. Unfortunately for both of these clubs, history could not repeat itself, and the final of that FA Cup season was Portsmouth against Cardiff, which Portsmouth later won under Harry Redknapp. Reds secured their championship status in that season, finishing in 18th place. A very strange record that Barnsley can boast about. Manager Simon Davey in 2008 and 9 season fielded the youngest ever player in history of the Football League, Ruben Noble Nazarus, who is aged just 15 years and 45 days old. He would have needed to go back to school the following day. He had not even taken his GCSEs, and he's made an appearance for Barnsley Football Club. Barnsley stayed 6 more seasons in the Championship, not finishing any higher than 17th, so they weren't really secure, and unfortunately they couldn't really build up on it. Eventually in 2013-14 they finished in 23rd place and were relegated back to the 3rd tier, League 1. Barnsley took 2 seasons to get back to the Championship, which was continuing the trend that they adopted back in the 70s of their yo-yo club trend. They beat Millwall 3-1 in the League 1 playoff final in 2015, which meant that Barnsley were promoted back for the 2015-16 season. In 2016-17, Barnsley had a potential ability to have new shareholders and ownership. Barnsley were caught up in an ongoing scandal in September 2016, where assistant manager Tommy Wright alleged to have accepted bungs in exchange for working as an ambassador for the third-party player ownership consortium. Wright was suspended before being sacked by Barnsley on the 28th of September. December 2017, it was announced that Patrick Kern and his family had agreed of new shareholders and co-owners of Barnsley Football Club, a consortium led by Chin Lee of New City Capital and Pacific Media Group, which is now led by Paul Conway and Grace Hung. Other investors involved Billy Bean and Nirav Parekh. Chin Lee had 80% of the shares, while the Kern family had 20% of the shares of the ownership of Barnsley. Despite the new shareholders and the club going to the new direction, potentially pushing up the Championship, they were relegated to League 1 following a very dramatic last day of the season. If you remember the season well, in 2017-18, Barnsley were relegated, potentially being the favourites out of the 5 teams that could have been relegated to stay up. However, they got absolutely destroyed by Derby County, who were fighting for the playoff place under Gary Rowett. And of course, it was in that season where Bolton pulled off the most incredible comeback story where they managed to beat Nottingham Forest by 3-2 to keep their championship status alive. This dramatic game pushed Barnsley down into 22nd. Barnsley had one season in League One. Their new shareholders appointed Daniel Stendel as their manager, who previously managed Hannover 96. Daniel Stendel got Barnsley promoted in style, only 3 points behind Luton Town, managing to get 26 wins out of 46 in that League One campaign. We now look at this year, where Barnsley find themselves last place in the championship so far, which could mean that their yo-yo trend is even going to continue more. But the story has not ended for Barnsley yet. They are in a position while football's taken a break, with 9 games left to save themselves. Can Barnsley pull off the impossible and save themselves? Destiny will decide that fate. And that is chapter 1 of Football Fairy Tales. Enjoyed this voice book and you would like to see chapter 2? Let me know what chapter you want the book to be based on in the comments down below. As Lex for Lexus would say, give this video a like, it is tremendously appreciated. Please share it to as many people as you can, because we would like to grow a community and more people to enjoy and appreciate the stories of our beautiful football clubs. We learned a lot about Barnsley today, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about a lot more clubs when we read chapter 2 of Football Fairy Tales. Stay safe, keep healthy, and thanks for watching. Peace.